public debate and conversation. So to warm us up for the conversation that's going to happen, let's try that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
One more time, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, cooking with gas now. I'm Kim Willingham. I'm the executive director of the Boston Debate League. We are a nearly 20-year-old organization, and our mission is to prepare young people for college, career, and engagement with the world through debate-inspired learning in the classroom and beyond. We are so excited to have you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're super excited to be partnering with our friends at 826 Boston. Where's Corey, who you'll hear from in a little while, and Right Boston, Abdi, raise your hand. And let me just tell you a little bit about why we did this. We decided to come together for a few reasons. First of all, for the Boston Debate League, this work is aligned with one of our strategic priorities, and that is to amplify critical discourse in community. We do a good job of that within our community, our BDL community, with students, with educators, but we think, hey, let's take our secret sauce and do it with the broader community, because we know that there are important conversations that need to be had, and we think we can help members of the community of Boston, the city of Boston, engage in some of those conversations. So this was part of our race equity policy series. So it's toward that goal of really engaging in discourse across the city. The other reason we wanted to do this is because across all three of our organizations, we are all about helping young people find their voices and use them powerfully. And that happens in a variety of ways. It might be in debate. It might be writing and having anthologies published. It might be media broadcasting. But we really believe young people have something to say and they should be listened to. And if you've been watching the news, you've seen this topic has come up a lot. We've heard politicians, we've heard policymakers, we've heard educators, we've heard the business community weighing in on this topic. But what have we not heard? Students. We've not heard the voices of young people. And so we think, they got something to say. Young people in this room, do you have something to say? Yeah. Oh, come on. Young people, y'all have something to say? Yeah. I know you must, because we hear it, and so we think what you have to say absolutely matters, and that you actually can teach us something. So our hope is that by engaging in this conversation today, that when you leave here, you will be a little more informed as you get ready to go to the polls, and if you're not of voting age yet, you can talk to the people in your life who are voting and representing you. So often adults are making decisions about and for young people without consulting them. And so today you have an opportunity to go back to your community and say, hey, I learned this today. And one of the things that we, lift up about debate is not about winning or losing. It is really about educating, it's helping people to consider another perspective. So you saw on your table or when you signed in a QR code for you to weigh in and say how you would vote today, or if you've already early voted, how did you vote on that? By the end, maybe that will change, and so we're going to ask you again to weigh in. Hi, Deli. One of our debaters. Yes, thank you, Sarah, showing the QR code. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues at BDL who are going to get us started, but before doing that, I do want to let you know that one of our expert judges, Jessica Tang, we learned yesterday, is not able to be here with us because of a personal loss, so we wish her well, but we're super grateful to Farah Asaraj, who has stepped in her place and will be debating on that side of the argument. So without further ado, my colleagues from the BDL.
Hi, everybody. I don't even know if my mic is on. Is it on? Can I be heard? Okay, cool. I'm Sarah Maper. I'm a classroom instructional coach for debate-inspired classrooms at the Boston Debate League. This will be my 10th year, shockingly. And my colleague Carlos is also here to help run this event. And I'm just going to get started by talking about what the purpose of this debate is, which is not, by the way, for us as an organization to take any position or try to convince anybody of anything. So what we want to do is engage in critical discourse about important issues. We want to learn with and from students. I just noticed that Harvard has a big policy event on this very question. Guess who's not represented at Harvard's event?
Yesterday. It was yesterday.
Oh, it was yesterday?
Yeah, I was going to go, and then
Yeah.
she told me this was happening, and I said, no, I'm coming here.
Thank you. Because I did notice that there were exactly 0 students represented at that event. And we hope that people leave with actually new knowledge or insights to inform maybe how you vote, maybe how you speak, maybe in terms of what you want to learn that you don't know yet. Okay, so with that, find someone at your table who you don't already know. And these are some things to talk about. You can introduce yourself. Oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. Sarah Maper, I use she, her pronouns. Forgot to say that. And what brings you here? We already heard someone who decided to come to this instead. And what do you think as of now? And I don't know yet is a perfectly fine answer. Okay, so we'll do, how many minutes are we doing on this? 2 minutes on this. Go, discuss.
Hello everyone, we're so thrilled to have you here again. My name's Marisa, as Sarah said, and I'm also with the Boston Debate League. And we are very excited to introduce the debaters to you. Before we do that, I just want to frame the debate prompt here. So, should Massachusetts MCAS high school graduation requirement be eliminated? That parallels basically what the ballot question is, question 2 for the November 5th election, which is part of what the video that we were going to show explained. I imagine most, if not everyone in here, has some knowledge of that. But just to be aware that the yes, saying yes, is actually saying yes, it should be eliminated. This is the classic ballot question confusion, right? So yes means it should be eliminated. No means it should be maintained. And so arguing on the yes side, which is this side here, we have Farah Asiraj, who's the CEO of CARE Education Consulting, also has a long history as a school leader and teacher within Boston Public Schools, and current doctoral candidate at Harvard. So we're thrilled to have Farah here, and on every team there is a sort of policy expert as well as a student and an educator. So Farah is representing a position that she actually holds, and the educator and the student, it may or may not, in true policy debate form, we flipped a coin in the room of Juan Gomez, so you can attest, and they were assigned. So at the end of the debate, they will get a chance to share, if they wish, if their actual opinion is different or the same, they don't have to, but they are going to still be bringing in their perspectives and experiences as well as other evidence. So we have Pam Doyley, who's a debate coach and debate-inspired teacher leader from the Ruth Batson Academy, formerly McCormick or Boston Community Leadership Academy. And we have Rachel Wright, who is a 9th grade student and debater and travel team national level varsity debater with the Boston Debate League, also at Ruth Batson Academy. So thank you. And arguing on the no, we have Will Austin, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Boston Schools Fund. And from Margarita Muniz Academy, we have Juan Gomez, who's a math teacher and debate coach with the Boston Debate League. And Danielle Martinez, a 10th grade student and debater on the Muniz Academy debate team. So here's how the process will go. Sarah already mentioned to you, this is the first half of the debate. We will open with opening statements from both Farah and Will. After each of them give an opening statement, the educator and student debater on the other side will cross-examine them. So we will have 6 minutes for the opening statements. I will be timekeeper. Debaters, you are also welcome to keep your own time as well. And I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left. And without further ado, let us begin our debate. Again, the prompt is, should the Massachusetts MCAS high school graduation requirement be eliminated?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Farah Asiraj. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. So I am a longtime teacher. I taught English language learners. I was a principal in Boston, as well as my last former role in the Boston Public Schools. I was the Deputy Chief Academic Officer and the Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Multilingual Learners. I also represented the Teachers Union as the Director of Organizing for the Boston Teachers Union. So I bring a wealth of education experience as well as personal, which I'll speak to in the end, that relates to why we should eliminate MCAS for graduation. I'll first start by some national data, and so to sort of contextualize Massachusetts. Massachusetts touts itself as the leading state in the country. However, we have to really recognize that that is a false measure if we're looking at the National Assessment of Educational Proficiency, which is the only measure across the country that compares students. We might certainly, by that measure, rank as one of the top 5 states in the country, leading in reading and math. In that assessment, it is only assessing a sample-sized student body across the state in 4th and 8th grade, not 10th grade, and again, there is no high stakes with that as a requirement. So by that measure alone, we may suggest, or it may suggest that we are doing pretty well. However, has been recent research through Harvard and Stanford with the education scorecard, recovery scorecard in particular, that compares the data, and that data comparison is using that NAEP data, again, that national assessment, and it sort of overlaps it with the state data. And so what that finding suggested, again, if we were looking at this measure, is that Massachusetts had the highest gap widened from poor to not poor in our communities and districts. So it really depends on which measure you're using for success, right? As a teacher, as an educator for multilingual learners, I taught students very much like my mother, who I believe is the most brilliant person, who did not get a high school degree. They also were not literate in their first language, so they were in a specialized program called SLIFE, which is Students with Limited Interrupted Formal Education. And I also taught newcomers at one of the best schools in Boston, Boston Newcomers Academy. You know MCAS. We have a lot of those students, my former students in the debate league. And with those students, what was heartbreaking and heart-wrenching over and over again was the lack of opportunity and access to high school graduation. And so the reality is we're not just looking at graduation rates for multilingual learners, students with disabilities. And so with Massachusetts being what it is, we are at about 40% of low income, 13% of limited state designation, limited English proficient, which means English learners, and about 20% are students with disabilities. Those are the students most serve as the most disadvantageous in terms of graduation. So they are the ones that are not graduating with their cohorts, whether it's 4 or 5 years. There are also foster care and houseless students that are also the highest in terms of the gaps and disparities between graduation rates. Our English learners continue to be the largest group of dropout students. And again, having been a teacher as well as a district leader and a principal, I value assessments, as great teachers do. They leverage the data, they use assessments to drive instruction, to be able to really identify what are the needs of students. However, when it works against students' outcomes, when it works against the trajectory of their life goals as well as life outcomes in terms of social mobility, economic mobility, higher education, then we have to take a look at what we mean by equity. And so we really love this word in Massachusetts. It's sort of also, again, one of those states. We're leading in education, we're leading in equity. What does that mean? And if we're measuring ourselves by the standards of our lowest performing students, we have the highest and some of the highest inequitable outcomes and achievement gaps for those students across the country. So I argue that in order for us to ensure that all students doesn't mean that what benefits us individually, that all students have access to not just high school graduation, but higher education as well as pathways for vocational ed, as well as pathways for other careers that can advance their life outcomes. We know that not everyone is on a 4-year career path. So a little bit about my history. I was an English learner and arrived to this country at the age of 10. I did not do so well in high school. I was a near dropout student, and I absolutely took the MCAS. Had it been required for graduation, I would not stand in front of you. And so with my high school experience, I graduated as an undocumented student. I continued to start my education journey at Bunker Hill Community College. I also finished my 4-year degree later as a full-time working adult and as a top student in my class with summa cum laude. I also got my master's, and here I am as a doctoral student at Harvard. But my success story is not one that represents the students that I have served and that I have seen, and so I can't stand here without representing them and ensuring that they also have the same opportunities to be here in front of you one day. Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you to BDL for bringing this opportunity for us to have this discussion. I do want to thank Ms. Farah as well for coming in and being the expert, as well as Will. We really appreciate you coming here. One of the questions we have is actually was one from one of the articles that we read in addressing the MCAS highlighting schools that need improvement given by the op-ed in Time's Up for MCAS. It did state, oh, thank you. I'm not used to mics. It did state that the purpose behind the creation of the MCAS was to ensure that all high school students receive the same standard of education, and given by your opening statement, you agree with that regardless of region or location. And additionally, it aimed to identify, right? That was a key thing in the MCAS was created to identify requires more resources to achieve the same level of education. So it was essentially created to be able to identify what high schools needed the most support. So how we're removing the MCAS impact school accountability, in particular ensuring that underperforming schools receive the necessary resource and attention.
Excellent question. So we want to differentiate between standards and assessments and accountability, right? So Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, that is what the state requires for every grade level as a standard for education and educating our students. Regardless, right, if they're a student who is an English learner, if they're a student who has a disability, that is what you are building your curriculum, lesson plans, and really integrating, again, how you differentiate for students. The assessments that will, obviously, we're talking about MCAS, there are a variety of assessments that teachers use. If you're at a school district, there is at least another assessment that is an interim. There's additional curriculum-based measurements and formative assessments that are used. Traditionally, the assessment that we're talking about is MCAS. Now, after the education reform, it is a federal requirement that is a designation by the federal department, and so every state is required to assess students across those grade levels in those subject areas. So it is not a state sort of, we can kind of change the requirements, if you will. However, the way in which we're using the assessment, I think, is really important. Do teachers and educators use MCAS assessment for teaching and learning? Probably as some indicator to kind of, again, overlap as a holistic view of where students are in other assessments. The challenge is that we're referencing the way in which we're teaching towards that assessment, right? So as someone who changed the learning and curriculum and designated project-based learning and saw how students really thrived in even 11th and 10th grade post that 10th grade mark, where they were able to present their portfolios and demonstrate their learning in other ways, there is a value in having an assessment, but it does not indicate the absolute holistic view of that student, nor does it demonstrate all of the standards that are expected to be taught. So the standards are expected at every grade level. The assessment the state uses is not going away. Your 4th grade, 5th grade, all of the other grades, our participation rates are actually pretty high in Massachusetts. So I encourage you to also consider that the requirements aren't changing in terms of participation. We're expecting every student, the accountability is also not changing. That means that we're looking at where we're making improvements and progress and where districts are, as well as schools, as well as particular students. So again, that is not shifting, nor is it changing.
Thank you, and that is time, but we're going to allow Danielle as well to ask a question and let you answer for maybe just one sentence, and then you can have further response in the closing statement. So Danielle, go ahead.
Honored to be here. So my question is, how will removing MCAS as a graduation requirement overweigh the unintended consequences, such as lowering graduation standards?
Great question. So great question. So again, if it's not required in grades 3, 4, so I was the principal for grades 3 to 6. My teachers and teachers I worked with and the students worked extremely hard. There was no graduation requirement. Again, the standards need to be, and that expectation for students has to maintain at a high level. But more so, if anything is coming out of this debate and this discussion, it is the level of awareness that we need to have on specialized populations to be able to assess what are we doing that's effective, how can we improve outcomes, where does that funding formula really apply to ensure that students on the margins who need additional support are supported. Whether it's you're voting yes or no, I encourage everyone to really participate in what is the educational outcome for students to make sure that we are keeping and maintaining that expectation and that high level of rigor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the yes side and for the cross-examination. So we're going to move into the no opening statement with Will Austin. Again, know that the high school graduation should actually be maintained.
Hi there. Before the clock, I'll recognize there's an elected official here. China Tyler, I saw you come in. She stepped up. There we go, right? That is the representative of 7 Suffolk. This is her district, and totally by coincidence, I taught her. And totally by coincidence, she's also no one too. Boston Debate League, thank you for having me. Thank you so much for coordination part. We've seen each other in a while. We agree on a lot of stuff, just not this one thing. So I'm really excited we get to share the stage today. My name is Will Austin. For 15 years, I was a teacher and principal across the street in Mission Hill. Spent the last 10 years running a nonprofit for the city of Boston. I feel really passionately about closing racial achievement gaps and opportunity gaps, and that's why I feel so passionately that folks should vote no on too. I'm going to make an argument in 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk about the concept of fairness. What does it mean to be fair? What does it mean to be equitable? I think we all agree that should happen. We may have different ways that we define that. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the opposing or proponents' arguments. Some of their arguments, I believe, rest on some faulty data and faulty assumptions. And then lastly, I'm actually going to agree with Farrah. I actually agreed with her closing statement. I think we do need to dramatically change graduation standards. I actually don't think this ballot question does that. Those are my 3 points. Am I doing this right today, people? That's just
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right. So what does it mean to be fair? What does it mean to be fair? Well, I guess fair, in my sense, we think about commonality. That things are the same, that they're clear, that they're transparent, right? And in Massachusetts, we make a promise that no matter where you live or where you go to school, you'll have access to a great public school. That is the promise. Civil Rights Act, IDEA, Title IX, you have clear policies and procedures and data in place to make sure people are treated equally and equitably. If we remove the MCAS graduation requirement, there'll be no common graduation requirement in the entire state. True, we have common standards. It is not true that we have common graduation standards. Every single district makes their own. We vote yes on this on November 6th. There'll be 351 different ways to graduate high school in Massachusetts. Different means inequitable. Different means unequal. We've seen that in education policy. If we don't like the measurement, a thought exercise. Seas are rising. Temperatures are going up. Bad storms. We're going to throw out the thermometer? No. We use that measure to find the inequalities and to allocate resources in the way that Farrah was advocating for. You're going to hear a lot of rhetoric. You're going to hear about high-stakes tests. High-stakes tests are bad. They sound bad. I would argue the MCAS is not. Why? You can take it up to 4 times. There's an appeals process. I asked the department, I was curious, you know how many points you have to score on the math, a 10th grade exam to pass last spring? 15 out of 60. 25%. That's not high stakes. And yes, some students don't pass. 1% of students don't pass. But that is on the state and school districts to serve those students. Up until age 22 if necessary, right? Because they're allocated education to that age. And so if we have a policy where 69,300 kids are meeting the bar and 700 aren't, let's allocate resources to the 700. Let's not change the entire policy. Teaching to the test. This is one I really like. Where do these questions come from on the MCAS? They come from factory. They're developed. They're assessed. They're vetted. They're field tested. They're checked for bias. By whom? Massachusetts public school teachers. We're not teaching to the test. They're teaching to their test. And when I hear stories about stress in schools, anxiety, test prep, that's not a bad test, that's bad teaching. We're supposed to make kids feel comfortable with stress and anxiety, help them cope, help them understand all those things. Last thing I'll say is that there's not a binary. You can give a test once a year and still do project-based learning. You can give a test once a year and still do expeditionary learning. You can give a test one time a year and do different fun things with your kids. It's not binary. Why make us choose? Lastly, I agree completely that the graduation standards in the state are not satisfactory. One test is not enough. That's why I would advocate that we would have common graduation standards across all districts. Why is it that we don't have required coursework across all districts? Why should half the districts in Massachusetts get access to MassCore and other half don't? This ballot question doesn't do that. What it'll do is eliminate the one common thing we have and have nothing in its place. So that's why me, teachers, educators, your governor, the child of teachers, your lieutenant governor, the child of teachers, your attorney general, a Boston Public School graduate, your secretary of education, a Boston Public School principal, your speaker of house, a former teacher, your senate president, a former school committee member, all believe this is a bad idea. Please vote no. I'm going to try to answer fast. We get a lot of questions.
No, just one quick question. It is my understanding that when the legislation was first passed, that enacted the MCAS, funding readily flowed. Scores slightly began to move up. And then at some point,
About
the funding,
2014, 15.
right, and so then the funding then was cut. So according to, you asked the question, why don't more schools or why don't more students have access to the MassCores, et cetera, et cetera? And what you're basically saying is, why don't more students have access to the curricula and the extracurricular activities that provide them to excel? So is the necessity us actually providing more funding as opposed to MCAS? Because what does it serve? What purpose does it serve if only 1% of the population can't pass it anyway? So what is the point of it?
It's a very good question. So this is where I would say the MCAS is best, and I think you'd agree with her, it's best understood as a floor, not a ceiling, right? We have to understand what's a minimum standard we expect kids to make, and we have to have that no matter what. Now to go back to your other question about funding, that is not related to this question. We could have a separate argument about the millionaire's tax and why it was a good idea. But the reality is that regardless of whether this funding is going up or down, we need a common measure so we can allocate that funding. Otherwise, we don't know how kids are doing or where money should go.
Okay. Thank you. One of 8 states in this great nation that requires a test for graduation. And here's what I know, and I thank the BDL for this time. Here's what I know about everybody in this parallel line, in this linear space. We all really care about our students, and because of that, we are dealing with a high-stakes situation. But here's the problem. According to a recent op-ed published by the Globe on October the 6th, they asked the question, what would go away if the MCAS was to be eliminated? Because it's a fundamental part of the state's guarantee to all students that no matter what their background is, no matter the wealth of their community, their school has to provide at least a minimal basic education encompassing math, science, and English. And that is exactly what too many of our districts, especially in urban areas, provide. The bare minimum. Here's what I want you to consider. I want you to consider that the 99% rate, which is sensational of people who pass, but it represents something that is far more sinister. That what we really want in our society, this isn't just a Massachusetts problem. What education has boiled down to is this whole idea is that we want to educate our students just enough so that they can pass the test, not be critical thinkers and be robots, right? But then, simultaneously, we have institutions that want to live with this lie that they actually are doing something in terms of creating citizens who can really run a democracy. That being said, my concern is for the teachers and the educators, including the ones on this panel, that are truly dedicated to the idea of providing the best for our students. My concern is for Chris Gramapre, who teaches with me, when he finds out that algebra has been cut because of scheduling changes, but it's okay because we think we can provide just enough math so that we can get the growth scores that we need so that we don't get in trouble. My concern is myself. Sorry to include myself, but I've been up in knots every single night because I stay up every single night thinking about how best to serve my students. And what I am told is that I can no longer teach up. In other words, I can't teach night. I only can teach things that are below standards. This is the first argument that I had when I became a teacher in Chelsea. I got in trouble. I got reported because I taught a classic in John Steinbeck. Then I got in trouble because I wanted to teach Shakespeare. And they were like, no, you can't. And I was like, yes, I can. And they were like, no, you can't. And I was like, yes, I will. And then I went and got the books and closed my door, and I did just what I needed to do. So here is the thing. MCAS is nothing but a dilution of a higher standard that is set by the great Commonwealth. And that standard is to provide college and career readiness for all of our students. And so what this test is being used for now is just to dumb down our students. I don't care if they eliminate this not only as a graduation requirement, require all students to take the SATs or some vocational school, but let's have a real standard that represents real movement for our students. And then once you do that, then you can talk about the real creativity where we can take all of our students who are ELLs and then we can get together and have a language requirement for every student in this Commonwealth like they do in Europe. Then we can talk about maybe having trips or trips across international trips for all students. Then we can talk about the AP courses that they have at the exam schools, distribute them to all students. Then we can talk about the real standards that creates a real society of critical thinkers to keep this nation as great as it is.
Okay, so there's not that much time on the clock, so yeah. So sorry if I kind of talk a little bit fast. All right. When I look at schools in my district, I see all kinds of different AP classes, almost any club you can think of, and programs for any career you want, opportunities that let you explore your interest in who you are. And when I look at my school, which has barely half of anything these other schools have. When you put MCAS in this light, there's a huge disparity in education and opportunity between schools like mine and the schools and the one I just mentioned. I agree that that differences equal inequality, which is why expecting kids across vastly different backgrounds to raise to the same standard when there are many odds stacked against them is greatly unfair and/or inequitable. I know that I can pass the MCAS because I do my work and because I'm lucky because I also do debate and I also have Ms. Doyley to push me. But the key question is, will I be on the same level as those other schools? MCAS does not account for these disparities, and a student shouldn't have to do an extra curriculum or shouldn't have to go to a special school to simply simply succeed in life or simply to be able to just go into college. And also, according to Citizens for Public Schools in April 23, the policy failure is rooted in its inability to address the factors that cause those opportunity gaps. Underinvestment in those schools and other essential services could effectively level the playing field, and the use of standardized tests that does not accurately assess or prepare our increasingly diverse student body with the knowledge and skills needed for participation in college, career, and civic life. This reaffirms my point that the MCAS does not address what causes opportunity gaps and doesn't even prepare students for real life. onto what the other side said, note that there would be a no statewide graduate requirement. Again, according to the Citizens for Public Schools 23, the MCAS testing would continue as required by federal law, and there would be a statewide graduation standard for students that students would be required to meet. So there are still standards that students have to meet. There are still federal tests. It's just we are taking one test out of 1,000 other tests that students will have to take. And thank you for your time.
So I want to start by saying thank you again for coming and being part of this debate and inspiring this discourse that we had. I think too many times in life, especially when it comes to discussion, we don't have those, and the public does suffer. With that being said, I want to address a couple of things, especially around Ms. Pam. You brought a lot about, when she talked a lot about the 1%, right? The 1% failure rate or the 99% passing rate. And discussing that, how, it only, why have that test? But the data, right? We're talking about the data that is produced, and as a math person, the MCAS gives crucial data that addresses a lot of the weaknesses that we see in foundational skills like reading, ensuring that students are prepared for future academic challenges. Not only that, as a high school math teacher, I see many times where students come with a lot of fundamental gaps in their learning. And by having those MCAS scores and data, we're able to use that and better serve them in our classrooms, including having more targeted and efficient strategies to support them in that way. And I also want to end sort of with this whole notion of the standards. And Daniel's going to talk about a lot of our standards as well. But when we have this passion, and I know you're passionate and I'm passionate, but we're saying who's going to set these standards, we have to be clear. Once we take away the MCAS as a requirement, there's no longer going to be a uniform standard. So we could say schools individually, right? Or districts, right? Newton sets its own standards that might alienate some of our own students, some of our black and brown students, for going there being able to graduate from those high schools. So when we talk about eliminating the MCAS as universal through the district or through the state, then who sets those standards? Who does that for our students?
Thanks again for coming. So you were talking a lot about standards, and without MCAS being a graduation requirement, standards will be unequal between districts. I can imagine a situation where students might choose to attend high schools with easier graduation requirements, avoiding those higher standards because meeting a tougher criteria could be more challenging. The Washington Post argues that fewer than 1% of students fail to graduate solely because of MCAS scores. Most students who struggle with the test have alternative pathways like portfolio submissions or appeals. We are emphasizing an issue that impacts only a small portion of the student's population's ability to earn a high school diploma. Also, if we take MCAS as a graduation requirement away, then I believe that many students will not take MCAS seriously. An example of this is with math testing. Math testing in my school, I believe that me and my friends usually don't really take that seriously. And it's like, it's just drilling, like no one wants to do it, but we still do it, but we don't take it seriously. So if you take MCAS as a graduation requirement away, then many students won't really care and won't really try in MCAS. Thank you.
In this conversation, our debaters, Danielle and Rachelle, can we give them a round of applause? Our educators, Juan and Pam, thank you. And our honorary debaters this evening, Farah and Will, thank you. Now you all can see the poll. your exit poll data. We got a little bit of a shift. So a little bit of a perspective shift for folks tonight. Yeah, great. So I also want to thank our partners in this event this evening. 826 Boston and Right Boston. Our collaborators. I want to thank our sponsor, Co-op, and our media partners, the Boston Globe. We have in the room tonight, Teens in Print who are in the room tonight, and then El Mundo. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about what each of our organizations do, there's some information on the tables out there, so please grab some of that. And we also have Valeria from our team, and we have Mohammed from Right Boston, who will be looking to speak with folks. So if you feel like you had a perspective shift and you want to share a little bit, they'll be recording and talking to people. So we'd love if you would talk to them, because we want to share this with folks who weren't able to come here tonight, because we want this to impact the conversation. So thank you everyone for coming, and have a good night.